Thank you so much, worship team. We're going to begin a new sermon series today. You can see the picture up there behind me. I hope no one is offended by that photo that I have chosen for this. It was really an attempt just to capture the summertime that we're in right now. Yeah, there you go. And what Jesus really wants to teach us through one of the greatest sermons ever recorded, the Sermon on the Mount. And I have a confession to make to you today as we begin this new series. One of the most daunting tasks as a pastor is to go before the Lord, to spend time with Him, and to hear from Him and to know where He is leading us as a church body so that we can plan a series like this. And so we know what God is trying to teach our church body at this specific time, in this place, in this time. And so, God, I wanted to share with you kind of how I came to this series, how God spoke to me and led me to this series, and actually came through my dad, spending some time with my dad this summer. For those of y'all who don't know, my dad just retired from the ministry after 47 years of pastoring in North Carolina. Yeah. And as a gift to my dad, the church rented this home on the beach in North Carolina for not just for my mom and dad, but for all of the kids, all of the grandkids to be able to go and spend a week together. We haven't been able to do that in years. My sister's a missionary over in Central Asia. We're here in Texas, and so it is so difficult for all of us to be able to get together. But for this special occasion, we were able to go home and celebrate, spend this week together at the beach. And while we were at the beach, Karen, if you can bring that photo up, or Tony, we had beach church on Sunday morning. Another thing that you need to know about my parents is when we went on vacation, it didn't matter that we were on vacation, all right? We were going to go to church. That was one of the things I appreciate most about my dad. We knew, even on vacation, that God was the priority in our family. Okay? And when we were kids, when there were only 4 of us kids, we would get up on Sunday morning and we would find a local church to go and be a part of. But this particular occasion, there were 22 of us, and we started thinking about the logistics of getting all these grandkids ready and trying to find a church and going to a church. And so we decided, you know what? We're going to have church. We're going to have beach church right here as a family together, all 22 of us. And my dad is going to deliver a message to his kids and grandkids. If you can see him kind of in that neon shirt sitting right there in the middle of that big crowd of people. And so as I was thinking about what he shared that morning, here's the message that he chose to give to his kids and their spouses, 4 kids and their spouses, to 12 of his 13 grandkids. He's thinking, this is my one shot, okay? We're all together, and I have a message that I want to share with my family. I want them to know the goodness and the blessing and the joy of what it is to follow Jesus. And the message that he chose, the verses that he chose, were the Beatitudes found in Matthew chapter 5. He said, this is the way, Jesus taught this is the way that you find blessing and happiness in your life. God has blessed me and your mom. He has blessed our family, and I want Him to bless my grandkids. I want Him to bless my great grandkids, and this is the way you have that blessing. You experience that blessing. And so that's what we're going to do for the next 7 weeks together. We're going to look at the Beatitudes. God just led me. You know, this is something we need to look at together as a church family. We need to know how to find and experience the happiness and the joy and the fulfillment and the blessing that only comes through a relationship with Jesus Christ. What are the steps to happiness? How can we find that blessing in our lives? And so we're going to spend the next several weeks together on the mountain with Jesus, looking at 8 statements that he made, actually 7 statements, and we're going to finish out the 8th, actually starting a new sermon series. But we're going to look at these statements of Jesus together. So let me set this up. Jesus is beginning his ministry here in Matthew, in the Gospel of Matthew, and he's traveling. He has been baptized. He is announcing the good news of the kingdom. He's healing people. He's driving out evil spirits. Great crowds are beginning to gather around him. And one day Jesus notices the crowd. And he goes up on this mountainside, he sits down, he gathers his disciples around him, and he just begins to teach. Probably looked a little bit like Beach Church up there, right? He sits down in the middle of his disciples, these followers, and he just begins to teach them. Maybe the greatest sermon ever recorded. We call it the Sermon on the Mount, and it's found in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. And in these first words of this first sermon, in the first book of the New Testament, we're going to find some incredible truths. They're so important, we're going to spend the rest of the summer on the Mount with Jesus. Okay? So, Jesus is going to address a question that I think all of us at some point have asked ourselves. We just finished this Q&A series, so this is a kind of a perfect segue into what Jesus is teaching us here, because he's going to address this question: how can I be happy? Have you ever asked that question? How can I be happy? How can I find happiness? How many of y'all are out there searching for the good life? Are we searching for the good life? Yeah. Yeah, that's what we want. That's what we're seeking. So let me ask you this morning, are you happy right now? Just kind of take a moment to reflect on that. Are you happy right now? One survey that Ray was even able to find on Friday as we were meeting together said that only 3 out of 10 of us are actually happy, would say we're happy. 3 out of 10 would say that they have found happiness. I think many would say, well, I'm not sure if I've ever really even been totally happy. I've seen glimpses of it. Maybe I've had experiences here and there, but I've never found true happiness. So the question becomes, where do we get it? Where do we find it? Where do we find true happiness? And in this Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is going to give us 8 ways to be happy. And how do I know that? Well, because Jesus is going to begin 8 statements that we're going to look at. He begins each of these statements with the words, blessed are. And what we need to understand is that word blessed in the original Greek language, if we looked it up in the dictionary, here is the definition of that word. It literally means what? Anybody know? Happy. It means happy. So when Jesus says, blessed are, what that literally means is happy are. Here's some of the nuances of this Greek word. Happy, blessed, approved, utmost spiritual joy. Isn't that a great definition? Utmost spiritual joy, supreme blessedness. And here's maybe my favorite nuance. The highest type of well-being for human beings. Does that sound good to anybody today? I mean, that's what I'm searching for, the highest type of well-being that we can possibly attain as human beings. Jews used to use this term to describe a person in the state of salvation, someone with the grace and the favor of God on their lives. And here's kind of an amazing truth. We're going to learn this over the next several weeks, that this God-given joy, this happy heart, is totally independent of our circumstances, right? Isn't the happiness that we're normally searching for totally dependent on what's happening around us? Everything's got to be going well. Everything's got to be lining up. I've got to feel good for me to be happy. And what Jesus is going to be teaching us is you can find this joy and fulfillment and peace and blessing completely independent from whatever you're going through. That's good news for us today. Here's another way I want us to think of the Beatitudes as we get started with this series. These are the core values of the kingdom. This new kingdom that Jesus has come to usher in, these are the core values of the kingdom. Now let's think about that. Kingdom, that word kingdom actually means rule and authority. So Jesus has been announcing, I am bringing the kingdom of heaven down here to earth. I'm ushering in the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And every kingdom has a king. And guess who the king of this new kingdom is? It's Jesus. It's King Jesus. So he's saying, these are the core values of my kingdom. Of my kingdom. If for all of those who will adopt this mentality, this kingdom mentality, this mindset, this orientation, this focus, this priority in their lives, who will become my kingdom citizens under my rule and reign, who will adopt these values, he's going to give us a promise. He says, you will be blessed. You will be happy and fulfilled. You will experience God's favor in life. I want us to notice that these blessings are reserved only for His kingdom citizens. We have to take that step. We have to be under His rule and reign. We have to follow Him to be able to experience these blessings. Jesus is saying, this is the goal, okay? Forget about everything else that maybe you've learned from tradition or religion. This is what the goal is. This is what you're shooting for. This is what I want you to look like. As a citizen of my kingdom, here's what I want you to look like. And I'm not just going to say these words to you for the next 3 years as you follow me. I'm going to show you what this looks like. All you got to do is look at me. I'm going to model this for you. So I'm going to show you how to live this way. And this is the goal. Isn't this sad? Isn't this the truth, though? So often we're aiming for the wrong goals in life. We're pursuing the wrong things. We're measuring ourselves by the wrong standards of success. Well, as long as I'm showing up for church, and maybe I'm reading my Bible and I'm giving, I've got the checklist, that's the measure. And Jesus is going to say, those outward things, that's not the measure. What's happening in your heart? What are you allowing me to develop in your heart? These 8 Beatitudes that he's going to share are inward character qualities. They're heart qualities that he wants to build into our lives. They're the signs of a blessed life under the rule and the authority of King Jesus. So let's look at the first beatitude together this morning. This first step to happiness. That's the sermon title for today. What is the first step to happiness? Now, this first statement, it's the key to understanding all of the others. If we can get this one right today, all the rest of them that we're going to talk about are going to fall into place. So we've got to get this first one right in our understanding. Here it is, Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. Blessed are, or happy are, right? That's what that word literally means. Happy are the poor in spirit. Wait a minute. That can't be right. Is there a typo, Karen? That can't say poor in spirit, can it? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So Jesus is saying, happy are, here's kind of the formula he's going to follow. Blessed, and then he's going to give us an instruction, and then he's going to give us a reward for all of these. The blessing, the instruction, the reward. Blessed are the poor in spirit, and here's the reward. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, poor in spirit, what in the world does that mean? Why would God want any of us to be poor anything? Why would he want that for any of us? How can that person be happy? Here's what I want us to notice here as we're trying to understand what this means. Notice that Jesus doesn't say, blessed are the poor, okay? He's not talking about money or finances or stuff right here. Jesus is talking about spiritual poverty, the poor in spirit. Okay, I get that, but what does poverty of spirit even mean? What does that mean? So I need to explain some of the Greek for you. I don't normally do this, but here's what we need to do. We need to look at the original language just for a minute, because there are two words that Jesus could have used when he's talking about poor, using that word poor in the Greek. So the first one described the working poor. Okay, so I am able to go out there and work and kind of scrape together whatever I can, but I'm doing the best that I can, but I am still at the poverty level. I'm the working poor. Jesus does not use that word. Instead, he uses the other word in the Greek that describes the begging poor. Okay, do you see the difference? He doesn't use the working poor. He uses the word for the begging poor. Now, what does that mean? It means that someone who would be on the street corner because they couldn't work, who had no power to help themselves or improve their position. It means that if someone didn't have mercy on them, they would die. This is the word that Jesus uses. So what is he saying? He says, the blessed person, the blessed kingdom person is the person who recognizes their spiritual poverty, their own helplessness. And in the words of that old school song, Ain't Too Proud to Beg. Y'all remember that song? Ain't Too Proud to Beg? We recognize without the grace and the help that God has to offer us, we have nothing. We're completely helpless and hopeless apart from the mercy of God. I can't do this without you, God. I recognize my need for you, and I'm not ashamed to declare my spiritual bankruptcy. This is who I am. I'm spiritually bankrupt. Jesus says, you're never going to be able to earn the salvation that you're seeking, what you're looking for. The only way you'll ever get to heaven is if I have mercy on you. But here's the good news. I've come to have mercy on you. That's what he's going to announce in this amazing sermon. I have come to have mercy on you. Now, I want us to stop here and make just kind of a clarification. Being poor in spirit doesn't mean wallowing in self-pity, okay? It doesn't mean that I'm a doormat or woe is me. I'm just kind of walking around with this woe is me attitude. That is not what Jesus is describing here. Jesus is saying, and kind of here's a great clarifying statement that I found. Being poor in spirit is less of an emotion and more of a recognition of reality. I'm just recognizing the reality of my situation. And what does that do? It helps me to understand I have nothing to offer God, and then humility that flows from that understanding, that I have nothing to offer God. And this humility doesn't wallow in that hopelessness, but rather it runs to God, desperately calling out for his grace and mercy. So here's what Jesus is saying. Here's the first step to happiness. We must admit our spiritual poverty before we can receive the spiritual riches that God offers. We have to admit that we're empty before we can be filled, right? That's not what the crowd was expecting to hear that day. Maybe you weren't expecting to hear that even today. Not what they expected to hear right after the promise, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You know what the crowd would have expected to hear that day? They expected Jesus to say, your father is Abraham, therefore yours is the kingdom of heaven. That's not what Jesus said. He didn't say the descendants of Abraham. He didn't say Jews. He didn't say the religious elite, the Pharisees, because many in the crowd that day thought they were right with God just because of who they were. Well, I was born a Jew, and now I'm following, doing all that I can to earn favor with God. But Jesus didn't say good people either. He didn't say moral people. He didn't say rich people, the educated, the well-born, the popular, the powerful. See, the religious system had been twisted in that day to put these people in special possession of God's favor. But he didn't list any of those folks. He said, blessed are the broken people, the humble people. Blessed are the spiritual beggars, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is a shocking statement for his audience, but at the same time, this is amazing good news. I read a chapter in a book this week that Ray recommended to me from Dallas Willard, and he goes on to explain how revolutionary what Jesus was saying was in this chapter. Jesus is saying, blessed are the spiritual zeros, the spiritually bankrupt, people with no spiritual qualifications or abilities at all. No charisma, no religious glitter or clout, the written off, the poor, the captives, the blind, the oppressed. Remember when Jesus opened that scroll in the book of Isaiah and said, this is who I've come for. The poor, the blind, the captives, the oppressed. No one is beyond the blessing. Everyone is invited. The lost causes, the flunk outs, the dropouts, the burned outs, the broke and the broken. Jesus didn't come to earth to save those who already had it figured out. He came to save those who cannot save themselves. The religious system had left the multitudes out, but Jesus is welcoming them in. If you felt like anybody on that list I just mentioned this morning, there's good news for you. You're not excluded. That's exactly the qualification that Jesus is looking for so that he can open wide the gates of his kingdom and welcome you in. There's the expectation. There's the condition. You need to be a spiritual beggar. You need to admit that. You need to understand that and admit it. And when you do, I give you all the grace. I give you the keys to the kingdom. That's the good news for us this morning. The audience is shocked. The audience is shocked. He takes everything that they've learned from their tradition and he flips it upside down. In fact, Jesus explains later in Matthew chapter 5 that unless, this is verse 20, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. How can that be? These are the best, these are our religious leaders. This is the cream of the crop, the best of the best, spiritually speaking. And what we need to understand right away in this first sermon Jesus is preaching, he is dropping truth bombs on this audience. Okay? He's destroying all of their expectations. Right away he's saying it's not about religion. And it's not about tradition, and it's not about this outwardly focused self-righteousness where I'm most concerned with appearances, with my image, with my reputation, instead of what's going on in my heart. He's blowing all that up for these people. And he's getting us on the right track. No, this is what it looks like. This is what I want to do in you. He says later of the Pharisees, these guys give me lip service. They talk a big game, but their hearts are so far from me. Don't be like them. Don't do the religious thing. Forget about self-sufficiency and looking good and your image. What's going on in your heart? I think Jesus gives a perfect illustration of this in a story that he tells in Luke chapter 18. Do y'all remember the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector? Here was the purpose of this story that Jesus told in Luke chapter 18, verse 9. It says, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. So he's got people in mind that day that he wanted this story to just land on, okay? For those who were trusting in their own righteousness, who were confident in themselves, who thought they were approved by God, made right with God through their own efforts. So here's the story in Luke chapter 18, starting in verse 10. 2 men went up to the temple to pray. One a Pharisee. Remember, this is the religious guy. This is the good guy in the story. Actually, he's the best guy. And the other, a tax collector. So for those in the audience that day, all right, you said tax collector, immediately I understand. Here's the bad guy, the cheater, the traitor, the sinner with a capital S. So Jesus is already setting up in the mind of his audience. Here's the good guy, the Pharisee. Here's the really bad guy, the tax collector. And they both are going up to the temple to pray. So who do you think is the candidate to have their prayers heard? Who's God going to listen to? The religious leader who outwardly appears to have it all together? Or this lowlife tax collector? To get a clue, let's examine their prayers. Let's continue verses 11 through 14. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer. Now, most of the people in the audience would know, wow, these guys are dressed nice. They like to speak really loudly, usually on the street corners, but this time he's in the temple. So, he's really good because he's going to say his prayer loud and proud for everybody to hear. I thank you, God, that I am not like other people, cheaters and sinners and adulterers, and certainly not like that no good scum tax collector sitting back on the back row. All right, I didn't point to anybody back there. All right. He says, I fast twice a week and I give you 1/10 of my income. Do you hear the words coming out of the Pharisee's mouth? He's so proud of himself. Hey, everybody, come see how good I look. There's the announcement as he stands in the temple with his prayer. One commentator said his prayer is to himself, with himself, and about himself. But let's listen to the tax collector. But the tax collector, so this is in contrast to this religious guy, stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. I can't even lift my head to heaven. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, "Oh God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner. Have mercy on me." Which one of these guys is showing spiritual poverty this morning? What do we see in this tax collector? We see humility and we see brokenness because of his sin. He realizes his utter hopelessness, that without God's help, he's doomed. He's doomed apart from God. He knew that he didn't have it all together. He knew his need, and he knew the only one who could meet that need. He couldn't even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his chest. This is a sign of repentance and remorse when you can't even express on the outside what you feel on the inside. He's repenting and seeking God's grace and mercy. Be merciful to me, a sinner. Let's look at the conclusion of this short story from Jesus in verse 14. He says, I tell you, the sinner, the tax collector, the bad guy, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. What that means is the tax collector went home forgiven. He was the one that was made right with God. And then here is the spiritual truth Jesus wants to leave us with from this short story. For those who exalt themselves, the proud, the self-righteous, the self-sufficient will be humbled. And those who humble themselves, the poor in spirit, he says, will be exalted. This is the condition, this is the instruction that is necessary for me to be able to open up the kingdom of heaven in your life. All of the riches and blessings of my kingdom will be unleashed in your life if you will assume this heart posture of humility. So what's the lesson for us this morning? We got to get real with God. Okay? No more games, no more religion, no more tradition, no more just showing up for church, no more checklist, no more outward appearance, no more image and reputation. What's going on in my heart? What's the reality of what's going on in here? Because that's what God cares about. Get real, get humble, stop trusting in religious activity. Stop being more concerned about what people think than what God thinks. My reputation versus my character, my image versus my heart. Jesus brings it back to the heart, and he says it's actually the broken people, those who recognize their need for God. These are the ones who inherit the kingdom. He says, when you get real, he'll meet you right there where you are. There's the condition. I'm just waiting for you to get real, to get humble. And I'm going to be there with my forgiveness, my mercy, and my blessing over your life. But here's the reality check for us. Most of us, knowingly or unknowingly, have spent our whole lives trying to be anything but poor in spirit. Isn't that the truth? Anything but poor in spirit. I read one guy, he said, we want to be rich in spirit or at least middle class. Right? Let me kind of live in this area, right? In the gated community. I don't know about this whole poor in spirit thing. We want to feel like we're sufficient for the task, like we have it under control. I can do all right on my own. I can handle this. I can do this. We've been taught that real happiness and fulfillment in life are found in pursuit of self-reliance, self-confidence, self-determination, self-esteem. And the result of that, this is one of the most me-focused generations in history that we're a part of. You can see it in our social media habits. I read this week there are 1 million selfies posted in our country every day. 1 million. Karen, on Friday, she said she was at the movies and she went to the restroom a couple times, and she said both times she went on separate occasions, both times there were groups of teenage girls in the bathroom, mind you, taking selfies, okay? They weren't even in the movies. They're just in there in the bathroom taking selfies. Cameras used to be for taking pictures of others, but now we fill the world with pictures of ourselves, don't we? I think there's a pretty comical illustration of this. Bring that meme up for us. I found this meme, okay? That's Neil Armstrong. All right, this guy went to the moon. He went to the moon. Y'all remember that Brian Regan skit? I walked on the moon. This guy was on the moon, and he only took 5 pictures. He brought back 5 good pictures from the moon. This girl went to the bathroom, and she took 55. All right, okay? But this is just a comical illustration of, honestly, the reality for so many of us. Okay? How can I be poor in spirit when I've been taught, it's been shown to me when culture has just driven it into me that it's all about me? right? And Jesus is flipping the script, and he's saying it's not all about you. It's not all about you. That's not how you find happiness. Social media is built on displaying not our poverty of spirit, but our richness of spirit. Culture tells us if you want happiness, if you want fulfillment, promote yourself. I, me. Does that remind you of a prayer we just read from the Pharisee? Promote yourself. It's all about you. If you're going to get anywhere, you've got to put yourself first. Go big. Chase after success, pleasure, leisure, popularity, stuff. But the reality is, from a survey that we read this week, was this is one of the most depressed countries in the world. We've got the most money. We have the most vacations. We seek pleasure, success, and we are one of the most depressed countries in the world. 3 out of 10 of us have actually found happiness. 3 out of 10. What are we pursuing with our lives? That's the question for us today. What are we chasing after? Jesus says if you try to keep your life for yourself, you're going to lose it. But if you'll lose your life in me, if you'll seek first my kingdom, then all of a sudden, yours is the kingdom. I'm going to give you everything that you need. Seek me first, and all the rest will be added unto you. But again, we're confused. We're buying into the lie, the deception that no, I've still got to chase after my stuff, and I've got to build my kingdom. And Jesus is just shaking his head. That's not how it works. I need you to understand, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Do you see how countercultural that Jesus' message is? Not only back in that day, but for us today. How countercultural that message is. When you think of the word blessed, what comes to mind? Just think about that for a minute. When you think of that word blessed, when you see that hashtag on social media, blessed, what's normally the picture that's posted right above that hashtag? Man, life is great, right? Everything's going good. Life is going smooth. We're getting what we want. When I actually want to happen is happening, then man, hashtag blessed. Life is good. And I'm happy, at least for 5 minutes or so. And then we get back to the reality of our lives. Because that type of happiness is dependent on our circumstances. When things don't line up the way that we want them to, guess what? We're unhappy. Man, I'm not getting what I deserve, what I'm entitled to. People aren't acting the way that they should act, doing what I want them to do, so I'm always going to be unhappy. If it's dependent on circumstances and other people, you're never going to be happy. And Jesus is saying, I'm offering you a way to be blessed and have joy and fulfillment completely independent of your circumstances. And here's the first step. Poverty in spirit. Jesus is redefining for us what it means to be blessed. And we're going to see that for the next 7 weeks. And I hate to spoil it, but this idea of blessing has little to do with what car you drive, or what house you live in, or what job you have, or even how healthy your relationships are. That's not what Jesus is going to be talking about when he's talking about blessing. When Jesus speaks of a blessed person, he is talking about more than the happiness that comes from having stuff or status or other things that we normally chase. Here it is. This is it. According to Jesus, happiness is not a set of circumstances, but the fruit of a right relationship with God. There's where it comes from. This is revolutionary. This is shocking. It's not what's been taught to you out there. It's not what the culture has ingrained in us. Jesus is he's dropping truth bombs on us. This is how you find joy and peace and happiness and blessing and fulfillment. It is being rightly related to God. And that relationship begins as you empty yourself so that He can fill you with Him, with His spiritual riches and blessing. Happiness is a response to the gospel. These benefits of the kingdom come into our lives. I love how Tony Evans says it. When we are kingdom people doing kingdom work the King's way. Isn't that awesome? This is when we receive the blessing. When we're kingdom people doing kingdom work the King's way. If you want to experience all of the favor of the kingdom, all of the benefits of the King, then we have to align ourselves with Him under His rule and reign in His kingdom as His kids. So how can I be happy? Ironically, not by chasing after happiness. The happiness you're looking for is found in being rightly related to Jesus, secure in Him, living for Him. I love this quote from Francis Chan in his book, Crazy Love. He says, "Our greatest fear should not be of failure, but of succeeding at things in life that don't really matter." So the question becomes again for us, what are we chasing after? What are we pursuing? True blessing comes as I surrender my kingdom, my desires, even my religion, my image, my self-sufficiency, when I realize my spiritual poverty and I surrender to Jesus. When we come to Him with empty hands and broken hearts and admit, I am spiritually bankrupt. I owe an infinite debt of sin that I can never repay. And when we come to God with a confession like that, have mercy on me, you know what? He doesn't turn us away. He welcomes us and He says, yes, my child, now you understand. Enter into my kingdom and receive my blessing. He doesn't reject you. The spiritual zeros, the dropouts, the flunkouts, those who've messed up in life, He doesn't reject you. He says, you're right there where I need you to be. Because in that state, you can realize, I'm the only help that you have. I'm your Savior. Come to me. Admit your need. Listen to the paraphrase of our verse in the Message. In Matthew 5:3, you're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there's more of God and His rule. And I love that. With less of you, there's more of God. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. And we're not talking about just at the point of salvation. We're talking about a daily dependence on God. It starts at salvation and it continues through the rest of my life, daily. When I'm depending on God for provision, for wisdom, for power, for guidance, then we access His power. He pours out His grace onto our lives. We need to understand that this first beatitude that Jesus is teaching is actually an invitation to become this type of person, to experience His grace. How do you get this grace? James chapter 4:6. God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Over and over through the Scripture we see it. The humble, the contrite, the repentant. God's right there waiting to bless you. Admit it. I'm broken. I need help. I don't have it all together. I can't control and manage everything in my life. I read this daily declaration of dependence on God from one pastor. His name's Craig Groeschel. So see, we're all about independence, aren't we? We've been taught you should be able to do it yourself. You're independent. But in the Christian faith, it's about daily dependence on God. Listen to this declaration of dependence that he prays every single day. And we sang the song earlier. I need you. Lord, I need every hour, every minute of every day, I need you. Listen to this prayer. God, I give you my mind. Renew it with your truth. I give you my eyes. May I only see the things that matter to you. Keep my eyes pure and focused only on what matters most. Take my ears. May I only hear your truth. Silence the lies of the evil one. Fill me with your word. I offer you my mouth. May all my words be pleasing to you. Take my heart. I know it is deceitful above all things. Make it new. Use my hands. May they be instruments to serve and strengthen others. And take my feet. Lord, lead me on righteous paths. I need you in every area of my life. May my steps take me only toward your perfect will. In Jesus' name, amen. A declaration daily of dependence on God. This posture of trust and obedience, of humility, not performance, of dependence brings that blessing, that happiness, the good life that we're searching for. As I close today, I want us to understand that what Jesus is teaching, again, I want to say it again, this is an invitation to relationship. To relationship. And everyone is invited. No one's excluded. Everyone is invited. And it's the first step to happiness. It's the condition for the flow of God's favor and blessing in your life. And here's what Jesus says. You got to get real with what's going on in your heart. You got to get real. It's good that you don't feel like you have it all together, because I can work with that. I can work with that. I can meet you right where you are and work with that. I want to produce so much in and through you as you walk with me and trust me and learn from me and depend on me. I want to give you the kingdom. I want you to experience the riches and the blessings of my kingdom. It's not what you have, it's who you have. So come to me, pursue me. Come humbly to me, and I'll meet you right where you are. Let me pray for you today.